Hello friends, Chris Matthew with Forbidden Knowledge News, here with a special announcement. We are starting production on the Forbidden documentary. That's right, we're breaking out the camera, lights, microphone, and hitting the road. This is going to be much bigger than your average conspiracy doc. It's going to be a conspiracy docu-series. And we're going to take all of you on the road with Forbidden Knowledge News, as well as all your favorite guests that have appeared over the years, authors, researchers, scientists, whistleblowers, contactees, fellow broadcasters, and some of you listening as well. The topics will include paranormal, ufology, historical conspiracies, hidden ancient history, current conspiracies, spirituality, cryptids, and much, much more. We're going to visit sacred and spiritual sites and places of high strangeness, and hopefully visit with as many of you along the way as possible. This project is currently completely self-funded, and we're asking for your help. We are going to jump into this head first, and hopefully the universe and maybe some of our amazing audience will help a bit. If you'd like to get involved with the production, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. And if you would like to help by leaving a donation, we have a Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal option. You can go to supportfkn.com or click that PayPal link in the description. Any amount is greatly appreciated and will help tremendously. And if you make a donation through supportfkn.com, you're going to also get access to select chapters from Cory Hughes' upcoming book about the JFK assassination. Be a part of an epic journey of discovery and truth with the Forbidden documentary. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Keefer, but first just a couple of announcements. Starting this Friday through Sunday, we're having the Forbidden Gathering in Fort Collins, Colorado. That is the 6th through the 8th. If you're able to, come on over. We're going to be having parties, we're having outdoor games, guided meditation, hiking, and a live podcast Saturday night, and much more. If you'd like to attend any or all 3 days, email me at forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com to RSVP. It is free to attend, but we only have room for a few more. I really hope to see some of you guys there. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Minds, Odysee, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Rokfin is where you get our premium content, as well as all the premium and free content from every creator on Rokfin. Just go to rokfin.com/FKN+, or click the link in the description to sign up. Our website is forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We've got some amazing podcasts on there. And finally, something I am very excited about. We are happy to introduce you to Ascent Nutrition, founded by my good friend Lance Shuttler. Lance is making a huge difference in this community with his company, Ascent Nutrition. They have a new product that is sweeping the nation, pine pollen. Last year, several prominent scientists started speaking about the power of pine trees and the benefits they can offer to us. Ascent Nutrition offers raw, wild-crafted pine pollen. Pine pollen contains 200 nutrients in it, making it a true superfood. It is nature's highest source of phytohormones, which support hormone and libido health for men and women. Pine pollen also supports brain health, detoxification, as well as many facets of cardiovascular health. Ascent Nutrition is your premier source for pine pollen as well as many other unique products. Their pine pollen is selling out so fast, it's literally flying off the shelf. So you want to pick that up right now. Ascent Nutrition is on a mission of offering deeply transformative and helpful nutrients to as many people as possible to help bring about a great collective shift in human consciousness and human health. A portion of the profits are donated to holistic healing programs and selected rape crisis centers that help people who have been trafficked, raped, and sexually abused. To order your pine pollen supply and review the menu of health supplements that Ascent Nutrition has to offer, use the link in the description or visit goascentnutrition.com and use coupon code FKN to get 10% off your entire purchase. Today I want to welcome back to the show Raven Keefer. He is a researcher and contributor to both Wikipedia and Indymedia at their start, and an expose writer from mid-'80s through today. He has 2 master's degrees, a doctorate in religious studies, bachelor's in humanities with emphasis on sociology and psychology, and several associate's degrees in various fields. He currently has 23 books in print and has been a lifetime researcher that contributes to numerous YouTube channels, content creators, and independent reporters. Raven, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you back on. Always an amazing discussion. And we never really know where we may end up or what rabbit holes we may fall into along the way. But I thought tonight we could start with a little Tartarian history and mud flood theory and see where we can go from there. That leads to so many fascinating rabbit holes. And this is something that I've recently heard about within the past maybe year and a half, 2 years. When and how did you first start looking into this stuff?
Well, for me, the Tartarian connection didn't really come into being until just like the last, 2 or 3 years. So, I was looking at the mud, the mud floods. I was looking at the resets. The resets were the thing that really got me looking at what all had been going on, because we had a reset in the 1600s that we know about. We had a reset in the 1800s that we can be pretty sure about. And both of those time periods was like completely covered over in mud.
Yeah. Now, what's the best evidence? Like, we don't hear in our modern academia or history books about anything that could have been a potential cataclysm that may have wiped out a good portion of humanity, much less mud covering the planet and sinking buildings into it.
If you just start and work your way backwards, that sometimes that's the easiest thing to do, because if you try to jump 700 or 800 or 900 years backwards, that's a huge gap. So just, work your way back from for me, I've got family that were born in 1854. So even at that, say 1860 or so is about as far back as my family memory goes. But my great grandmother's always had some really weird things to say about how we got moved out to Oklahoma and things like that. So, you start where you start. So 1860s, we had double wars. The Civil War also had a lot of wars going on over in Europe too. But everywhere you look during those wars, all the photographs they got, they're like knee deep in mud everywhere. Now that is kind of strange. So I started doing some digging, and there are actually stories about, very good example here in the United States, since most of the people that listen to us are from here. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Maine, they had fireballs coming down from the sky, burning whole regions. And then then you start saying, now, wait a second, we had a bunch of cities burning between 1810 and 1910 too. 400 cities, I can find 400 different stories where it was either a blacksmith or a cow knocked over a lantern.
Now, when these meteor showers, is this potentially, I would say maybe the torrid meteor shower, I believe, when these occurred?
That's where that's where it's really hard to track it to a meteor shower. And the reason why I say that is because the last events that we know about went on from 1810 to 1910. Now that's 100 years that we had these strange fireballs burning things up. Right smack dab in the middle of that, we had the Carrington event in 1859 that fried all the telegraph wires. And see, that was electromagnetic. The stories up in Minnesota, people were walking down the street and some kind of like a fireball hit them and turned them to ash as they were running.
Right.
Now, that's Sodom and Gomorrah type stuff.
We see, artwork and paintings depicting these types of things, and you of course, you won't hear any stories from the mainstream, but you get into people's stories from their ancestors, great grandparents, and that's, like you said, where you start hearing these interesting things, right?
That's it. When you have plasma balls, they described them as balls of like light until they actually touched the ground, and then they incinerated everything, and literally turned people to ash. Not burned them up and left skeletons. Turned them to piles of ash. Turned whole cities to piles of ash. And then there's stories from the United States. We got some stories from out west, from the Russians who were there at the time in Washington and Northern California. We got some stories from Europe. Munich, outside of Paris. We got stories from India, some from China even, and that's the 1800s. And the reason why I chose that one first was to see if we could find a pattern. It apparently was happening all over the planet during the 1800s. Just, random. It seemed like, you guys have been talking about the petroglyphs lately. And a lot of the stuff that these people were describing sounded like, these petroglyphs that we've been talking about, the electric petroglyphs.
Yes. Yeah. The plasma scars.
Yeah, the dancing man.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start getting stories from around the planet that go from 1800 to 1904 is really the last one I could verify, and that was in Northern Europe, Sweden. But the thing about it is it was planet wide. Now, we had all these wars that all of a sudden started up. And like here in the United States, everybody went south during the Civil War in the 60s, 1860s. Were they trying to move people away from where they knew that these events were going to occur? It's kind of curious. Curious timing, too.
Yeah, it is.
But there was mud. But there's mud everywhere. Mud everywhere. If you look at all the photographs from the 1800s all over the United States, where they were taking their photographs, there are just like mud ruts everywhere. Even during the Civil War photographs, they've got, their cannons out and, a third to a half of the wheels stuck in mud. They're trying to get it out using mules. Same thing happened over in Europe. You can see over there during their war in the 1800s. They had the same problems over there with mud.
That that leads to if this is a
worldwide
they had the same thing in Russia
too.
Yeah, if this is a worldwide phenomenon and this is occurring at all around the same time, and it may not be something that's, like we said, it might not be a meteor shower, then the question is, what could have caused this global devastation around the world at the same time? And that leads to many different theories. I've had guests that say that anything from nuclear war to alien attack to other types of global cataclysm like global volcanoes and earthquakes, or possibly nuclear war. There's also the theory that we were highly advanced before this happened.
I think we were highly advanced. We'll get to that part. With you wanted to talk about the Tartarians and the mud.
Yeah.
But you got to kind of give people a background. I would point to Jay Widener's presentations on the Eye of Henday for somebody that's really interested. But there's also a thing called Sorath, the sun demon. The sun likes to spit at us every once in a while, and when it does, things get burnt. And if you look at the patterns, and then you look at the solar alignments at the time, that is the similarity. It's not, I can't track aliens. Yeah, we know this. I kind of laugh about it. It could be an alien putting us in the cue ball and lining us up for a solar flare or something. But the thing about it is the clock that we've always used, and it doesn't matter if it's Mayans or if it's Chinese or if it's East Indians, Native Americans. The clock that we've always used has been in the sky. We watch the stars, we watch the planets, and we watch for alignments. It's something that hasn't changed in who knows how long. But it seems like when we get into these alignments, like the one that we hit 12,900 years ago, things get reset big. Population decreases, and then it seems like every 400 years there's this weird hiccup, and you can chase it back. The one in 1800s, from 1810 to 1910 is kind of like an odd situation, because you can see it in the 1600s, you can see it in the 1200s. Then there's this weird thing that goes back to the 400s. There's like a repeat, and you've had a guest on that talked about, it looks like they skipped some time. Well, if you go to the writings that are supposed to be from 400 to 800, and then from 800 to 1200, there's a lot of repeats. Might be a different name, but it's like the same exact story, the same exact cataclysms. It seems like whatever happened in the 360, 390 period was so bad that it basically made everything kind of shut down for almost 800 years. And of course, in the meantime, you had 400 years later, you would have had another cataclysm. So it's like almost 800 years in there is missing. And that really fits with what they've been saying about the missing time. I talk about patterns, and we did this a little bit on day 0. I appreciate all you guys having me on the other day, by the way. But in the 1800s, in the United States, they had chanceries, and they had a list of like 100 things that they could pick you up for. And one of them was being overly intellectual, uncooperative. There was a whole list. You could be an educator, like at one of their universities at the time. But they had asylums. They put people in asylums, and any excuse they wanted. They could just pick you up, put you in there, uncooperative, whatever that means. And then you had the orphan asylums. And what happens is, about halfway through the 1800s, yes, we had the Civil War, but that's kind of questionable at some point. But the extent of it is questionable at some points. But then you see in the 1820s and 1830s, you had the orphan trains, and then later in the 1800s, 1880s, you had orphan trains, but very few adults. And then we found the documentation showing that they had picked up adults from all over the place and put them in these asylums. Go back to the 1600s, which would have been in the cycle. I said the 1800s was kind of like a hiccup. It was 200 instead of 400 years. In the 1600s, they had poor asylums. In Europe, they would pick people up off the streets that were too poor. They would pick up anybody that wasn't cooperating with them and put them in these asylums and just let them rot. And what did you have in the 1600s? I mean, one of the most famous stories is Oliver Twist. You had the street urchins. You can go back to the 1200s and see similar pattern again. You go back to the Roman era, and there's hardly anything that came through, but some of the philosophers wrote, they removed children from the cities, and they burnt some of the cities down with the adults in them. And the other thing too is they poisoned their food. The water was poisoned in Rome, and the bread was poisoned in Rome. So we can chase this pattern back. And you know how easy it is to reset? I mean, look what they're doing to our history. You're a lot younger than I am. And look what they have changed just in the history books that you learned from. You wouldn't believe the changes since I was in school.
Yeah,
it only takes 2 generations. You have to get rid of the oldest, and then the one in the middle, that's what those big asylums were for. And then the younger generations, easy. You just move them. I did a podcast, and I said, they had a system: eliminate, re-educate, relocate, and then start over again. And you can see the pattern, especially in the 1800s and the 1600s. You go back to the 1200s, it's a little bit more questionable, but then you jump back to what the Romans claimed to have done themselves in 770, which would have been that the cataclysm period there. They did the same thing there. They called it the Inquisition both times, which is another interesting thing. They had 2 Inquisitions, but they only listed it as one.
Oh, really?
They had the one in the 800s, and then they had the one in the 1300s. I'll tell you something else too. We're onto this pattern, and I don't mean to, I see you nod your head, but the Romanovs were killed in 1903. or 1903, 1918. They were killed by the Bolsheviks. Do you realize the Romanovs would have been the last true family that knew who the Tartarians were? They go back 300 years, and they were in power for 300 years. And they come right out of the area that, I know you've seen the maps, that are marked Tartaria.
Well, while we're
so
talking
they would
about
have been the last ones.
Yeah, well, we're kind of talking about these ancient bloodlines that could have been involved with these resets. Where do you think the Khazarians fall into that?
The first things first is they are actually from where the Ukraine's at, right in that area. But they're a combination of three different groups. You have the old Gnostics that were nihilists. They're the ones who understood that this place was an illusion, a false creation that we were in. And they wanted to get out of it. They didn't want to preserve it. They didn't want to make it better. They were PO'd at being trapped in it, and they wanted out of it. So you have nihilistic Gnostics. All right. Then you also have Sabbatine Frankists. Those are the ones that believe that if they are evil enough and do everything backwards, that's where all this inversion comes from. Good is bad, bad is good. The Sabbatine Frankists got married into the nihilistic Gnostics. Say that really fast 100 times. So now what you have is you want people who are nihilistic. They want the whole thing destroyed so they can get out. And you also have a group of people who believe that if they are evil enough, they will force the elder beings. And please note that saying. They don't say God. They don't say the gods. They say, we want the elder beings to come back here and deal with us. And if we are evil enough, then they'll come back and deal with us. And then you have this other group that were the merchants out of the Mediterranean that married into this group. And that's what the Khazars actually are. They are a marriage of these three insane, I call them anal retentive psychopaths.
Right.
But that's where your Khazars come from. And they got stuck right there in the middle, but they got trapped. They were trapped between the Rus people, which would have been the Romanovs, the Tartarians. They got stuck between them, the Roma, Romah, which were the northern people, and the true Persians, the original Persians that were in the Arab area, and the Cushites that were in Egypt. They were stuck in between them, and they were being squeezed out, and they almost got killed off. What's going on right now? And people get mad at me for saying this, but I say they're Khazarian bankers. That's what they are. They were name stealers. People can lift, like him, don't like him. Uncle Cliff Eye.
Yeah.
He'll lay it in the line for you. He'll know exactly what it is. But they're name stealers. A very good example. He went in England for 20 years now. You realize Windsor stole that name, right? They are not the monarchs. The true monarchs of England are the Tuatha de Damer. There's about 5 different ways of saying that, but it's Tuatha da Damer. Those are the true monarchs of the English islands. Now, where they've gone to, I couldn't tell you. But those are the old northern people. They're part of the old Roma, or Rama, Ramah, Rama people. But, everybody who got installed in Europe got installed after the Inquisition. And you got to remember something. The Jesuits are the old merchant, I call them the old merchant leathernecks. The Jesuit order comes from the original sea-bound mercenaries. Some people say it goes back through Phoenicia, but it goes further back than that. It goes about 6,000 years back if you trace it. But anyway, so, the Vatican's connected. Of course they are. What's the Vatican? The Vatican is the Roman Empire passing itself off as a religious oligarchy. And the same people, they're the ones that took a lot of those children back then and turned them into militants for the church. It's the same process over and over again.
So interesting.
And I don't feel bad about talking about it. I'll tell everybody the same thing.
This is great.
There's a treaty. There's a treaty. As long as people are willing to talk, then they have to let them. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm very careful not to name specific family names, but I don't mind pointing the Windsors out because everybody knows the Windsors are fake. And if you don't, you do now.
Yes.
They are name stealers. They are Khazars. just like the Rotten Shields, the Rothschilds.
Yeah, I mean, they hide behind names and religions.
They claim the name Bauer. Well, there's no way they could be a Bauer. They're not even from that region. So they had to take the Red Shield, and that's stolen too. That family was killed off, I think. Don't hold me to it, but I think the last ones of that bunch that you can trace are about 1070 or 1080 out of Greece. But they stole that name. So I mean, these are the name stealers, and they know they are. And the fact that some of us are willing to say they are, just they're pretty much shocked that anybody would actually speak of them that way. But those are your Khazars.
It's still the same them, those, they that are involved today.
Yeah, it goes back about 6,000 years. We had that last big cataclysm about 5,900 years ago. And the reason why I say 5,900 years ago, because if you use the Ethiopian clock or the Ethiopian calendar, which is lunar, or you use the Canaanite calendar, which is the one that they use, the Khazars use, it's 5887. That's how many years are on that. Well, 5888 now. So about 5,900 years, 6,000 years ago was that big cataclysm that put them in power. They haven't been in power that long. And what they did is they went and raided. People wonder why there was so little gold found in Egypt. It's because they used the Kushite merchants to go in there and kill the Kushites that ran Egypt at the time. And they raided it. That's where they got their gold to start with. I'm telling on them. I don't care. That's the reason why those tombs in Egypt didn't have as much gold as people thought they would. It's because between the Kushites, the traitors, Trait, traitors, the Kushite merchant traders went in there and helped the Khazars kill off the Kushites that ran Egypt at the time. That's who Kushites ran the whole north part of Africa for a long time, but they went in there and they butchered them. And then they used that gold to get themselves started, or restarted. The irony is people who follow Islam, and I say it all the time. I apologize for making them angry, but I don't apologize for telling you the truth. The people who started Islam were Kushite merchants, and all that gold that they stole out of Egypt and up through those areas, the old Kushite territories, they gave to the Vatican. They're the ones that put Rome back in power. And look at the trade-off they got, though.
Right.
It's about money and merchants.
What are your thoughts on the possibilities that certain portions of civilizations during that time period and before were highly advanced to the point where a lot of the technology that was available is being suppressed now, because if it was known about, it would change our whole civilization?
Well, if you go back to the oldest cathedrals that were taken over by the Romans, and I say taken over, not built. If you go back to the ones that are the oldest, now there are some of them that were built. I mean, that's a fact. They tore down the old structures and built over them. But some of the oldest structures have aquifers underneath them, and the tops of them were coated in copper or bronze, and they grounded. Now, you look at some of these old cities, and I'm talking about cities that we didn't design, that we built over. Or you can go look at the pyramid complex, for crying out loud. There's a best example I can give you. We know that's about 15,000 years old. All right. It's at least that old to have rain on it. So look at the pyramid complex and the way it's set up. You look out at the Nile River and you look at the way it has been diverted. And what they did is they built a terminal point there. At one time, the pyramids had gold capstones and they had gold embossment running down them like veins. That was all taken out. They had put the limestone over the top of it and sealed it to insulate the heat. And the opening pieces were still open. I don't know when they closed those off, but I think those were steam vents. I always have. Now I'm pretty sure of it. I've been studying gasifiers of different types. And in order to release the pressure, you have to have a high chamber and a low chamber. Well, look at the pyramids. What happens is you get a large electrical charge in the air. It hits the gold capstone. It runs down through the lining on the gold lining on the outside of the pyramid into the water chamber below and discharges the electric current out into the Nile rather than having everybody fried like happened at Sodom and Gomorrah. Then you start looking at cities that have been built, and we know that the Templars are behind. The real Templars are behind, like New York or like Washington, D.C., for example. They went in there and they formed the river, and then they laid it out. And if you look at it, it looks like a terminal point on a data grid or a chip. The idea is to diffuse the electricity out and away from, any excess electricity out and away from the surface. So there's proof. I mean, we've got plenty of proof that they were extremely advanced. And I use those two examples, but you can look at go down to South America and look at the layout of the complexes from higher altitude, and they look like chipboards, circuit boards. But if you look at the way they're laid out and you look at the water, there'll be a really odd chicane in the river. And you can tell that it's been manipulated to be that way. And a lot of them have diverted water underneath their complexes. What they've done is they've created a way to divert the electrical charge from the air down into the ground instead of getting everybody around there fried. Then you start thinking about the events of the 1800s that we know about, with those plasma balls coming down from the sky. And then, Squatter Man. These people knew what they were doing. And a lot of things that you all think are Tartarian structures that have the balls on top and the copper, and then it goes down the roof and into the ground. A lot of them old buildings have water aquifers underneath them, huge ones. And now, why would you need a water aquifer like that underneath your building? It'd be nice to have your own water supply, but they go into a natural well or into a diverted waterway. Well, good way to divert all that extra electricity in the air down through the ground. And it's what Tesla did. Tesla, when he built his tower, he put it over an underground stream, and he used the static charge that was in the air through his tower into the water in order to harvest that electricity and light up all that wireless lighting out there in Colorado. Now, I've just given away a secret. Most people that start talking about this stuff and actually explain how it works don't last very long.
Well, I mean, it goes back to what, if anything, is real about what they've told us in our history books and what academia has taught us. I don't know.
Yeah.
And you look at, especially healthcare, man. We look at life expectancy. We're told
1880s.
that. Yeah, we're told that
1880s.
it wasn't until recently that people started, living past 60, 70 years old. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that people didn't live past 100, 150, maybe older when years passed before these resets, just because,
Exactly.
We had better technology and they weren't killing us with poisons and crap all the time in a better, more utopian society that they didn't want us to know about? How do we know that it wasn't like that?
Well, the old Masons, and I'm very clever. I differentiate between Freemasons and true Masons. All right. The true Masons, when they built their structures, they built them for healing. They had healing resonance in them. And you've had guests on that have talked about how these oldest cathedrals, you go in there and they set up a frequency, and you feel better when you leave. And then you've got some of the newer ones that when you walk in there, you feel like you've been, mind screwed for the whole hour you're inside the building. That's the difference between some of the Freemason work and some of the old Mason work. And you can find it. You can find it plain as day. There'll be megalithic stone underneath it, and they build on top of it. But you change the resonant frequency of a place. You change it from a healing place to a mind control place to a sickness causing place. We know this.
Yes.
Sound works one way or the other. But you go back to some of these really old structures that people say are Tartarian, and you look at the roofs on them and look at the structures, and then look at Tesla, the stuff that we've actually got, photographs that Tesla did. It's the same technology. It's harvesting that energy out of the sky and getting it down to the ground. Now, were they taking the excess and grounding it out so it wouldn't fry everybody around them? I would say so, since they had the moving aquifers underneath those buildings. Tesla did it differently. He harvested the static and he delivered it out to other structures that would take in the charge and, wireless power. That tells you flat out that we've had technology way in advance of what we're using right now. In 1880, they had a battery you could go 600 miles on. Don't get me wrong, the car only went about 40 miles an hour, but still, 600 miles on an old lead cell battery.
I'll take it.
Well, and think about this. Those old lead cell batteries, you could repair your damn self.
Yeah.
And they weren't like this crap that they're putting in the cars now. It's like $60,000 with the price of the materials now. It's like, I think they said $60,000 between making it and trying to get rid of it. And it's toxic to the environment.
And so with the technology we have today, there's always an element that your average Joe, your average everyday person is not going to know what the hell is behind that kind of technology that's there. You're not going to find that many people who know how to the ins and outs of a modern vehicle, especially ones with computer chips. So there's always this element of modern technology that your average person will have no idea about. And you think about that compared to what could possibly be behind the super advanced technology that we're not being told about. The possibilities of what could already be there is quite fascinating.
Well, you go back to the Indus Valley writings. They talk about Vimana, and it's one of my favorite subjects because people say, "Oh, well, the UFO thing's just since the 1930s." No, it's not. The Indus Valley writings talk about Vimana flying through the air and shooting lightning bolts and massive fire bombs down on the ground, destroying everything underneath them. Some of them were described as big as large cities. This is, thousands of years ago. This isn't like last week or 10 years ago. This is thousands of years ago. The Chinese emperor, the Golden Emperor, wrote about the flying cities that would come to visit him, and he was honored to have them as guests. Now, the Golden Emperor, 8,000 years ago, everybody, there's this thing where they want to pigeonhole you into thinking that all this stuff is new. Right. Oh, it's just something that's just started in the last 100 years. And they try to, abscond with the fact that there's writings all over and stories from all over the planet that talk about. Good example are the Thunderbirds. Everybody's like, "Oh, the Thunderbirds, they're flying dragons or something." No, they aren't. Look at the description of a Thunderbird. A Thunderbird landed in the Southwest. It is described as a Harrier jet. It landed. It was loud. The drawing of the guy, he looks like he's wearing a flight suit, like one of our pilots would wear. The same Thunderbird is described in Australia. And curiously enough, in the Southwest United States and in Australia they both claim that the guy who flew the Thunderbird taught them both how to make boomerangs. Now that's awful daggone convenient.
It sure is.
Then you look at the little gold tree ornaments that Eric von Doniget had that looked like a jet. There's your Thunderbird right there. Right. But they like to, this is different and that's not the same. But when you look at it and you look at the timing of it and you look at the description of it and it's the same, it's really difficult to say that it's not the same thing. It's just happened in several places. There's the story from South America where I can't remember his name, so people down there, please forgive me. My brain is in other places, but he came to them in a fish that had shiny sides and arrows and spears wouldn't pierce it. And when he came out, it looked like he was wearing a diving suit. And he taught him how to grow food because something had changed. And he came out of the water in what is described as a submarine, wearing a diving suit, and taught them how to grow food at lower elevations. Now, how old's that story? Well, that's a Mayan story that goes back at least 6,000 years. Right. So somebody's got a submarine 5,000-6,000 years ago.
Now, were you referring to Quetzalcoatl?
I believe that. Yeah, it might be Quetzalcoatl. That's not the name that I had associated with that particular image, but
right.
They have an image of what looks like a submarine, kind of, scaly like a fish, and a guy wearing a diving suit. And I add to this that, I did a podcast a while ago, and I was talking about the 7 different kinds of people, and those that are helpers. They come from above, they come from below, and they come from amongst us. Well, from below, We know that there are oceans under the crust that we have found. And if you live down there and you try to come to the surface, think about the pressure difference. One thing I can say about that being that they describe in South America is he's never shown without his diving suit on. Well, if he is from an inner sea or an inner ocean below the crust, then being up here, the pressure would be so different that he wouldn't be able to breathe up here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, you apply what you know about science, you apply logic and rationale to it. And now we know that there is a bigger ocean under the crust than there is above. Yeah. So why couldn't somebody be down there that had submarines?
Yeah, it makes you think about breakaway civilizations and, all the opportunities that they could have had, like underground civilizations, underwater civilizations, if they're advanced enough. Those possibilities are quite interesting. And it also leads you to the questions of the nature of what we're on, the nature of our reality. The more I find out about the flat-out dishonest nature of NASA and the imagery and everything we see from them, as well as the lack of further evidence to kind of confirm the traditional model of space that we're told we're on versus the profound evidence that we've been getting in the past few years that we are not indeed on the traditional round ball spinning through space. And I am in no way a flat earther. I do not believe that we're on a flat earth, but I certainly don't believe that we are in a traditional model of space either.
No,
so
I don't either.
That leads us to the question, what the hell are we on? Reality seems much more malleable than it's ever led on to be, and our existence is seemingly non-physical. So again, where does that leave us?
Okay, well, let's talk about the three things that we know that we're in. We are in a frequency of light, a very narrow band. You and I have talked about this a few times. There are things right around us we can't see because they're outside of our band of light. We are also in a very, very tight band of sound frequency, right? But we're also held into a very, very tight band of electromagnetic frequency, which means that basically we are in we're in like, if we had a ruler that was 12 inches long, we basically occupy about a quarter inch of the space that we're in.
Yeah.
Now you think about that. A quarter inch of a 12-inch ruler is what we occupy. And, that's a rough estimate. It might be actually more like an eighth of an inch. But that's all that we actually occupy physically, and all of our senses, all of our physical senses put together. So what else is around us? You and I both know there are things around us all the time. As a matter of fact, I make it a point when I do my podcast to say my hand I favor all. And I'm talking not just to people who are listening to me. I'm talking about all the people who are around me, all the entities that are around me. But I am a Gnostic. I don't argue, not an agnostic. I am a Gnostic. I don't argue that point with anybody, but I'm also a theosophist, a lot like Rudolf Steiner. I understand the illusion that we're in. In India, they call it Maya. A Gnostic says it's a false creation, but I'm not a nihilistic Gnostic. I don't believe in the destruction of this place. I think that if we are in this place, we need to try to do everything we can to maintain and take care of this place and all of the essences that occupy this place. Now, that could be people like you and me. That could be animals, birds. That could be the elementals around us. Sabe, Bigfoot, I don't care, whatever. If they're here, we're responsible for them, not responsible for destroying them. And that's where things have gotten kind of upside down and inverted with those Sabbatine Frankists. They believe that if they're evil enough and destroy enough, that this place will be destroyed, even though it's an illusion. For years, I've been saying a holographic humanarium. If you look at the way a hologram works, that's the way this place works. You look at a baby when they're born, they don't see things in 3 dimensions. They have to learn it. They will literally crawl right off a table. They don't understand that there's a depth there. And when you get into a different environment, like in the mountains, you have to learn to scale things differently with your eyes because it's not natural. Well, if it's not natural and we're three dimensional, why isn't it?
Right.
I say we're kind of like in a holodeck. It's like the holodeck on Star Trek, except for the safeties are all shut off.
Man,
we
an
got
interesting.
meteors. We got meteors coming in. We got planets flying by. We got comets. We got and if you lose the physical body that you're trapped in, who knows? You might just jump into another. The way things are lately.
Yeah, man, and it's something interesting. I don't know if it was you I was talking about this with, but a few months ago I was driving 25 north Colorado, and the Rockies were, I believe, on. They were up to my left, and then the plains were to my right. And I'm looking over at the mountains, just kind of in awe, staring off into them. And then I note that to the right there are plains. Well, when I looked to the right, for a split second, the mountains were there, like solid as ever, and I kind of blinked, and they were gone. And it makes you wonder, for that split second, were the mountains really there? Was that just my perception? Does our perception create that reality? If I would have kept believing the mountains were there, would I driven into them? That's very interesting.
It is a very odd circumstance because they say. Look at the light experiment. If you're watching it, it's a wave. If you're not watching it, it's a particle. Mm. Now, how could something that is a stable source of anything like light change just because you're looking at it? It says something about the holograph that we're in. I say it's kind of like being, you play them RPGs where you got the non-playable character off to the side, and when you go by, it stops doing what it's doing. But then when you look at it, it looks at you and does whatever. And then the minute you get past it, it goes back to being nothing again. That's kind of what happens with us. You think about it, you're driving down the road and you're looking at the mountains and it's just a big blur. Mm. But if you actually drove over to that mountain, as you got closer, it got clearer. And then it gets clearer. And eventually, if you get close enough, you can see the cracks in the rocks. Right. And then when you get up, you can actually see the little flakes and the different colorations and texture and whatever of the rocks. Well, isn't that how a holograph works? Something to think about. It's the same thing when you look into space. If you look into space, it's kind of blurry. You get a pair of binoculars and now that's clear. Get a telescope and that's clear. Get a bigger lens and that's clear. What gave it away to me was there was a guy who had a backyard telescope and got the most awesome image of the pillars of creation with a backyard telescope. Now, that's after NASA has told us that they have to have a telescope in space with a long exposure to get a picture of the pillars of creation. Well, if the guy just did it in his backyard, that means that it is not as far or as big, and damn sure doesn't take as long as they've told us. That was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back with me, because they said they had to have the scope up in the air, and it had to be long duration, and it had to be pointed, and it had to be above the earth in order to do it. And this guy did it in his backyard on his driveway. Now you think about that. Pillars of creation with a backyard telescope.
Man, that's awesome. Definitely.
Well, yeah. And that's beside the fact that it's an awesome picture that he got anyway. But
well,
I honestly say that we're in a holographic humanarium. And I say that because of the frequency of light, sound, and electromagnetics that's required to keep us. We're mostly, if we didn't have an electromagnetic frequency around us, we'd just blow apart. The atoms that we're made out of wouldn't hold together.
Well, let's look at the aspect of cyclical cataclysms and what those could be, and the possibility that those powers in control, they know that we have these cataclysms, and they prepare for them way ahead of time, and they're ready for the next reset. They're ready to, repopulate the world with a new indoctrinated system, and possibly that's what they're preparing for us with all this COVID nonsense and everything that's happened in the past few years. Maybe they know the next cataclysm is right upon us. What do you think about that?
Well, we know that every 400 years there's been something. And one of them was bad enough that we lost about 800 years in time. They had to repeat their history books in order to make it, to fill in that gap. You look at what they did in the 1800s. You look at what they did in the 1600s. You look at what the Romans did in the 700s. You look at what they did with the Inquisition. You know, in the 1900s, they got rid of the Romanovs. That was pretty much finishing off that reset, because the Romanovs would have been the last consistent long-term family over 300 years that we knew about that would have had the previous knowledge. I do believe, you know, I hate to even use that word. I'm not going to use believe. Let me say it this way. I know for a fact that there are agencies and organizations that know exactly when the resets are. Proof positive. 12,900 years ago, we know that there was a big reset. You know, that's Göbekli Tepe and the ice age, little ice age. And then we got the Dryas. We go back 50,000 years, 100,000 years. We know that these have all happened. We've got the burn bands. The black soil band goes from South America across Africa, across India, and into China. That means that the equator that we have now is about 23 degrees off. Well, that matches with some of the other stories we have about the Earth wobbling. It didn't start doing it until the last, big cataclysm at 12,000 years ago. We have evidence that we have cataclysmic cycles. The problem is they have occulted the information to the point and muddied it up too. A good example is the Mayan calendar. They said, December 21st, 2012. Well, that wasn't inaccurate. It was half truth and half lie. They said December 21st, 2012. They gave you the Gregorian calendar, which is a piece of crap. If you go to the Enochian calendar, which is lunar count, just like the Mayans used, December 21st, 2012 would have been March 5th, 2021 on the Gregorian calendar. So see, these people are terrible. They will tell you the truth and be lying to your face at the same time. They gave you the right date, but they gave you a calendar that didn't matter.
Oh man, what do you think about the World's Fair and the possibility that they were showcasing some of that advanced pre-cataclysmic technology and possibly construction that existed?
Oh yeah. I mean, look at the giant electric motors and all the automated equipment that they had at these World's Fairs. I mean, they went out of their way to take photographs and make videos. I mean, if you look at the engineering that was involved, they had this one machine that was a generating machine, a generator to be put like on a water wheel or whatever, inside of a dam. If you look at the engineering involved, I mean, the Germans were getting stuff like that in the 1930s, not in 1890. So who figured out all this brass? Who machined it all? Who put that giant thing? It's the size of a daggone house. Who put it together with the equipment they had in the 1800s? I mean, you go through just the engineering video that they had from I think it was the Chicago World Fair. If you look at just the engineering building and the stuff that they showed in that video that they made, it's like, holy crap! I'd love to have some of that stuff now.
Right.
Some of them generators they had, you could run whole cities on. It's like, but where did they go? See, that's the other thing I can't figure out. They burn all that stuff down. They didn't really have the resources or the equipment there, like the big trucks. So where did all that machinery go? I can't find out. I have been trying to find out where those giant machines went.
Yeah, man. That is interesting. And one of the interesting things that I've heard recently when it comes to the nature of what we're on in our reality, it goes along with, I don't want to say, kind of the flat earth theory, but that there's extra land and extra realms that we're kind of trapped in what we know of as planet Earth and the continents that we see on our map. But there's supposedly more land out there, extra land that we can't venture to for whatever reason, people don't try because we're told, that it doesn't exist. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I find it interesting that Cook had to go like 47,000 miles around Antarctica to get around to circumnavigate. That's an awful big space considering the middle of the planet is like 23,000. And then if you get up north, it's even smaller. That seems more like a plate to me than it does a ball. But let me go back to what I have seen the carving that came out of China that showed the rings with the extra continents outside. I
Yeah.
have also seen a couple of the old maps, and then look at the United Nations flag. But here's the interesting thing: you can go back to some of the old stories, like Thor. A very, very good example is when the Norse people, when their elder beings resigned from humanity, what did they do? They went across the Rainbow Bridge to a land beyond our reach. That's kind of interesting, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah.
They went to a land beyond our reach, went across the Rainbow Bridge, and when they got there, they broke it
Yeah.
to keep us from going there.
Yeah.
Somebody says, well, that's not a literal story. Well, how do you know it's not? Because we have other stories that there were bridges to other continents that we could cross. Some had to be crossed on the water. Some had to be crossed on land. Some had to be crossed underwater. Now, how the heck would you do that? But they knew you had to go underwater to get there. It wouldn't surprise me if this place is, 5,000 times bigger than what we've been shown. We might be just in the little, we might be in the little divot in the middle. It
Yeah.
goes back to what we were saying about frequencies. This area that we're in right here might be a locked in frequency zone right in the middle, and there could be one right on the other side of Antarctica that we can't even see. Although Admiral Byrd said he flew for a heck of a lot further than he should have been able to, and
Yeah.
he actually saw mammoths and green and a whole continent that nobody's ever talked about since.
Yeah, man. That's
Yeah,
so interesting.
we know that we've been sold a bag of goods. Even if you don't dig very much, you know that somebody's selling us a bag of crap.
Yeah.
When you start digging like a lot of us do, then you realize they've been selling us a load of shite since at least 6,000 years ago.
Yeah,
At
man.
least.
It's fascinating. It's terrifying at the same time to know that almost all of our history is fake. Well, for the last few minutes I have, let's talk about this. We've gone from 2020 with all the COVID nonsense to a period of unsure that we would all be vaxxed and have some kind of 5G frequencies run through us and kill everybody. And now we're in a period where we're worried about nuclear war with Russia. It's always something, but it seems like they spent way too much time and money on the COVID op and vax and everything like that to just let all that go and just say bye bye to that. I see a comeback of COVID in the fall or somewhere around there, and a ramping up of a brand new fear campaign when it comes to that. Or we see some major climate change issues. I don't know. What do you see coming in our future?
Well, I'm trying to verify this, so maybe somebody listening to us now will be able to do it. But I heard that the people who refused to get the digital ID in Nigeria, they shut 23 million phones off because they refused
Whoa.
to get the application for the digital ID.
I've not
They've been
heard
trying
this
to
one.
get it in place for like 7 or 8 years, and people just refuse. Nope, I'm not putting the app on my phone. Nope, nope, nope. My understanding is they shut 23 million phones off. Then you look at what they're trying to do in Europe with their digital ID system. They want an app on your phone. It's not a big deal. It's just an app on your phone, but it's going to have everything about you, your
Yeah.
health records, who you've been married to, whether or not you stubbed your toe while you were drunk. All that stuff's going to be on your phone. No. The Chinese, according to the videos that are getting out or supposedly getting out, the Chinese are starving people to death over there.
Right.
And I look at the cycle that we're in, you know, we've got this alignment with the planet that's coming up in 2024. I think they're just trying to distract people as much as they possibly can while they institutionally are hoarding as much food as possible. You look at all the food deliveries. First things first, look at all the cargo containers that have been taken offline. Tens of thousands of cargo containers are no longer available for transportation. Well, the only reason why you would take a cargo container off of the transportation list is if it had something in it. Then you got all these truck drivers talking about taking load after load of supplies underground in the United States and other places. Truthfully, I think they're just trying to distract people. There's an old story. It says that when Mars stood in the hall of the gods and made war with the gods, he got his scar. It's the only time he ever got scarred in any of the stories, any of the battles. He was in the hall of the gods. Well, the hall of the gods is not a physical place in the way that most people think. The hall of the gods is when the four gas giants line up in a square with Mars standing between them and the sun. That's how he got his scar. Well, we're going to be there in October 2024. And in the meantime, we have to go in between those four gas giants and the sun twice. And we also have to be on the backside where it fires the equal and opposite force. If the sun discharges to the right, it's going to discharge to the left to keep the charge balanced. So we have 4 times between now and, well, it started 1st of April when we started seeing all those flares, and it goes all the way through December this year. And then next spring we'll be on the backside for a couple of months. And then we got to go through the same thing again. 2024, we will be where Mars stood when it got scarred.
And if there is one thing,
and I think all the other stuff is a distraction.
Yeah,
anything they can do to distract people.
There's one thing that I used to not pay much attention to and thought was kind of woo-woo, and now I believe is one of the most important things we could pay attention to is astrology and the positions of the planets and the sky clock. It dictates everything when it comes to energies here on Earth.
Well, I like Ben Davidson, and I'm gonna use his saying. Somebody says, "Well, when was the last time this happened?" Oh, about 12,900 years ago. And the guy says, "Well, how often does it happen?" And Ben says, "Well, about every 12,900 years." I hate to say that out loud, but it's true. And I'm giving Ben credit. We are at this point that was described in the Eye of Hende, Sorath, the sun demon, the Kabuki mask, one smiling at you and all radiant, and then the other one's got his tongue sticking out, spitting at you. That is Sorath, the sun demon. That is the sun when it's happy, the sun when it's angry. I think everything that's going on right now, and don't get me wrong, they want the reset. They want to have their children slaves like they did in the 1800s and the 1600s, and we know in the 800s. They want to have their children slaves and get rid of all the people who remember, like they have all along with the Inquisition. The Inquisition wasn't about a religion. It was about getting rid of people who remembered. If they weren't going to cooperate, they're dead. And they replaced it. And they replaced a lot of monarchs at that time too. But the whole point that I'm trying to get is, as bad as everything is, it's distraction. They don't want people to realize that we've got food shortages, that the weather is changing, and it's not weather warfare, it's the sun.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's a little weather warfare involved. We know the equipment works. But, the effects are going to get even worse. We know what the old stories were. And we've got the black soil bands across the equator that show what happened the last time the sun spit at this. It was so bad they buried the stuff at Göbekli Tepe to make sure it would last.
Right.
We are at that point. And unfortunately for us, we're also at a yuga, which is like, 102,000 years. That puts us at like a convergence of like 5 different patterns all at the same time.
Hey, good times, man.
Hey, I don't worry about it. We have today.
Right.
We have today. You and I've talked about this before. We do what we can today. We remember that we're not just responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for what we do and how we interact with everybody else. And, if the sun spits on us tomorrow, hey, I saw the writings from Minnesota and Wisconsin. Then people were turned to ash so quick they didn't even know it was happening.
Oh, man.
So, we won't know.
Yeah, man. It's like I say, you gotta find your own personal utopia. Surround yourself with like-minded people you can have conversations like this with, people you love, and don't participate in the bullshit, and you'll be fine.
That's it. Don't participate. It's not our game. It's like these guys are playing a chess game, and unfortunately, we don't win anything if we win the game for them.
Yeah.
Never once have we seen the rich get poor and the poor get rich after they've got done with their chess game. So just don't play. We do not have to choose sides. They say, "Oh, you got to choose side or A or B." No, we don't. That's a lie. We do not have to choose sides. We can do what we're doing, what you and I are doing right now. We can tell the truth as best as we can, give the knowledge up as best as we can, reveal the liars the best that we can. And by doing that, we're not choosing sides because they're all liars.
Yes, amen. Very well said. Raven, that was fantastic. Before you go, let everyone know where they can find your podcast. No apologies. Anything you got upcoming interesting?
Well, hey, we had a really good show the other day with some guys. It was called Day Zero. It's on Spreaker.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And then you can find me on Spreaker. It's No Apologies, enough said, and it's under Raven and Keefer. You can find me on Spreaker. Those are free to download too, by the way, everybody. And then of course we got all of Chris's stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna promote the guy. We got all Chris's stuff on Spreaker and Rokfin too. So don't forget to check him out.
Yes, and you got that check is in the mail for you for that, by the way. All right, Raven, that was excellent.
No, man, you're good. You're good people.
Well, thank you, man. You are great people, too, and I love every time you come on, and we'll definitely have you on again, and we'll have you on Day Zero again soon, too.
Appreciate that.
All right, man. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening, and we will talk again tomorrow. We'll see you then.